And if we could have the slides up, I need to explain the first image, which is partly like this book. But I have to say that, first of all, this community is wonderful. And I love coming to Toronto, and I love coming to Canada. And you folks really make me feel so terribly, terribly imperial from where I am. But going back and forth on a topic for the lecture, what's the title, what could we have for the discussion, etc. And in the middle, the Public Library of Toronto reached out and it said, oh, come here. So yesterday we spent a good time over in the Public Library of Toronto and had a good time. And they said, so what can you give us? And we kept going back and forth. Well, what about this? What about this? Come on, punch it up, Dave. I said, all right, fine. Radical librarians. They said, okay, good, let's go with that. So I'm going to, if you will forgive me, do the absolute horrible, worst thing that your worst professor ever did. I'm going to begin my lecture by reading from my own book. But it's worth it, I promise. Stick with it. It's not that long. Gotta remember where I put it. All right, there we go. The Arab Spring had come to Egypt. In early 2011, on the heels of a successful revolution in Tunisia, Egyptians took to the streets to demand reforms from a government regime that had been in power for nearly 30 years. While much of the media fixated on protesters who occupied Tahrir Square in the Egyptian capital of Cairo, many protests started in the port city of Alexandria. In Alexandria, as in Cairo, people from across generations in the socioeconomic scale rioted to demand liberty, justice, and social equity. In an attempt to restore the Constitution, what was seen primarily as a peaceful uprising led to the deaths of at least 846 people, and an additional 6,000 injured across Egypt. On January 28th at 6 p.m., after the prisons had been opened, releasing murderers and rapists onto the street, all security withdrew from the streets of Alexandria. Roving gangs of looters took to the streets to take advantage of the chaos. In Egypt's port city, the violence and looting devastated government buildings where offices once stood, only burned-out rubble remained. Protesters went from building to building, pulling down the symbols of corrupt power. Some looters and protesters then began to eye the Library of Alexandria. President Mubarak, the focus of the uprising, had opened the modern library in 2002 at a cost of $220 million. According to the library's website, Mubarak built it to, quote, recapture the spirit and openness, pause for irony, and scholarship of the original, the famous ancient Library of Alexandria, one of the wonders of the ancient world. And as it became apparent that the library might be in danger, protesters joined hands and surrounded the Library of Alexandria. Their goal was not to attack it or raid it, but to protect it. Throughout the protests and looting, the protesters, women, men, and children, stood firm and protected the library. In essence, they were retaking the library for the people. After the uprising had subsided, when President Mubarak had stepped down and the protesters were celebrating their victory around the country, not a window of the library had been broken, not a rock thrown against its walls. Why, in the midst of tearing down a regime, did the people of a nation protect the library? That's them. What's really interesting is when we all sort of heard and witnessed this story, but the story is particularly about the library. I was having a conversation with one of the librarians, and they tell the story, if you look in the flag in the upper, that side, I don't know if you're left or right. See, what's great is I don't have a left or right, I can't figure it out. So because I'm facing you, I can just say that way, right? Okay. That flag, protesters came up to the door and sort of knocked on the doors. And the librarians were like, do we open the doors? And they did. And the protesters said, is it all right if we put a flag, our protest flag, on the steps of the library? And they said, sure. And they draped the flags on the stairs, and so every day as the protesters would go to march through the city, they would stop and touch the flag at the base of the library to go and reclaim their freedom. Now, this is an inspiring story. It's why I stole this story and put it in my book. But what's interesting about this story is I tell this story a lot, because it's a good story. And I tell this story particularly every summer and fall when we have our first year LIS students. So about A third of our students are online students, so we force them to come in the summer so they can at least see each other. And so they sit in a room not that radically different from here, and they get me up and I stand and I read this and then we move on. Well, last summer, literally last summer, in that audience was a student named Jennifer Ilardi. And Jennifer Ilardi heard the speech, thought it was great, whatever, got back in the plane and flew back to her home in, wait for it, Ferguson, Missouri. Now, you may have heard about Ferguson, Missouri. Now, what's interesting is when I tell the Alexandria story, it often ends with librarians and library students going, do I have to do that? Am I expected to deal with civil unrest? And we say, oh, no, of course that would never happen here, right? And we just sort of move on. And we talk about the idea that the librarians in Alexandria were brilliant and brave and great librarians, but they were not exceptional librarians. To which many people say, excuse me, I think they were. And I say, then you expect too little of all librarians. Because to say that they are exceptional means they are an exception from a rule. And Jennifer Ilardi was about to prove me right or wrong. Because what happened, if you don't know the story, is in Ferguson, Missouri, a white cop from a vastly predominantly white police department shot an unarmed black teen and left the body to sit for hours before they came and dealt with the crime scene. Led to massive riots, massive eruptions, civil disobedience going left and right. What you saw on the news every night, I don't know if you saw it in Canada, but every night all over the US, every newscast started with these scenes. These scenes of a militarized police force. They're wearing camouflage, they're wearing body armor that is quite literally given to them from surplus military gear in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, look at the camouflage these cops are wearing. This is suburban St. Louis. They should be dressed as Walmarts if they want to be camouflaged, but instead, that's John Oliver's joke I stole. But the point is, right? They had mine-resistant vehicles. They had these massive tanks, literally tanks that they would drive in. And up against looters who were there, some protesting, and some had come to St. Louis just to pick a fight. And some were tearing down local business and starting fires. And every day, the riots got worse and worse. Rubber bullets being shot, explosions of tear gas. And the mayor, and eventually the governor, did a couple of things. Called up the National Guard, which was interesting. And then they closed the schools. Now, closing the schools means something very specific, and once again, this may be in Canada, but certainly in the United States. The suburb, the city, but really a suburb of St. Louis, the city of Ferguson has a large percentage of youth below the economic poverty line. And so what that means is they get their free and reduced lunches, they get their food support through the schools. And so what it meant when they closed the schools is that late into the night, unable to sleep, children would be huddled in their houses hearing combat, hearing explosions, hearing tear gas. They would have their parents, one NPR tells the story of parents sitting on the couch with a baseball bat in their hand on the couch just in case trouble came to their door. And they were hungry. This was the scene of Ferguson, Missouri. This was the scene that my student was now a part of. And while I had told that nice little story and done a nice little joke about, oh, but that would never happen here, she now knew I had lied. And she was going to then have to learn, what does it mean to be exceptional? What it meant to be exceptional for her was she woke up the next day and she said, you know what? I'm going to work. Her library was the St. Louis County Public Library, but it served the Ferguson School District. She said, I'm going to work, and I have an auditorium like this, and I'm going to put out art supplies, and I'm going to put out materials, and I'm going to order pizza. And I'm going to invite the kids to come in. And what happened between her library and the Ferguson Library is something absolutely amazing happened. What happened was, it started as something so small. Out front of the Ferguson Public Library, the librarian put a small itty-bitty sign that says, stay strong, Ferguson, we are family. And then something else extraordinary happened. He opened the library. And into the library, he invited teachers from the closed schools to come in and teach. He invited museums to come in and give museum programs. He had magicians come and volunteer to do shows. And the food pantries and food services came and delivered those free and reduced lunches at the library and fed the children. And I steal this idea, I borrow it literally, from Wendy Newman, who said, what this library did was they took over the narrative of the story. What this library did, and I want to be really clear here, this is not like, oh, let's give the library a lot of credit. What this library did, and is acknowledged for doing, is they said, you know what? On TV every night you see black versus white, you see combat, you see vandalism, you see strife. But we're a community, and we have kids, and we have families, and we take care of ourselves. And they changed the narrative to say, Ferguson, Missouri is not that different from Syracuse, New York, is not that different from Seattle, Washington, from Toronto, is not that different from where you live. And what these librarians did is they changed the narrative to say, we are a family, we are a community, and we are much more complex than what a simple, this two-dimensional depiction of stress and strife, which is amazing. It's amazing that they did this. And I want to be really, really, really clear here. This is what I tell my students now that I tell this story. I said, do you really think if the librarian had called up the mayor and said, I'm thinking maybe not today. I'm thinking story time could wait till tomorrow. I'm thinking maybe we'll close. That the mayor would have gone, oh, no. The schools are closed. You're going to be open. No, it wouldn't have happened. I mean, here was a mayor, let's face it, the mayor's face was probably like this for a week. Right? This was a governor of a state that put curfews in line, who said no one's allowed outside of their house after dark. And he's going to say, no, but the library's going to be open? So I put this story out. I told this story. We're all very happy about ourselves being librarians and deserve, once again, to talk about how amazing librarians can be. And I put this story out, and someone tweeted this quote. A library always makes a difference. Now, this is the difference between the speeches that I give when I'm talking to librarians and when I talk in an academic venue. Because in libraries, I would go, yes, great, yes. But in academic venue, I'm allowed to pick at lots of little things. And so I said, I don't think so. I don't agree with this quote. It's too easy to take this quote. This is the pablum that we send out on a regular basis. This is the thing that we make ourselves feel good about. But really, there's problems with this tweet. And the first problem is this. A library doesn't make a difference. A library, at its best, shields you from the rain and exerts gravity and decays and falls apart, right? A library is an org chart or an abstraction or a building. It doesn't do anything, right? We love to talk. Why as a profession, stepping out from my narrative for a moment, why as a profession do we give more credit to our mortar than we give to ourselves? Can we please stop that? Because what we're really talking about, and where I would begin to agree with this, is a librarian always makes a difference. That choice to open the library was not made by an automatic spring built into the door. It took someone quite literally the guts to drive through the turmoil and open a door. The director of the Ferguson Public Library says this was not exactly a love fest. This isn't exactly like that Alexandria story. He would wander the nights with a fire extinguisher in one hand, and he had people kicking at that door. And yet, the next day, he chose to open that door. The second part is that they always make a difference. Really? I mean, there's this sort of ecological argument to be made which says simply having a library makes a difference. Your tax money goes here versus going into sewers. I don't think this is the argument we want to make for the future of our profession, right? So really what they're trying to say is we always make a difference. And I say, I really wish that were true. But I think we've all encountered libraries and we've all encountered librarians who have done their best not to make a difference. And in fact, the whole thematic, that was an easy line, Dave. So let's take it for the rest of the night for a moment, that the line about we always make a difference isn't a truism, it's a choice. A librarian chooses to make a difference. Now, once again, we can all go, yes, that's right, that's good, yes, Alexandria, I'm right with you. But if you take a moment and you look at your training for a library science degree, you look at the ethical statements that the American Library Association puts out, if you look at your training for reference, if you look at your discussion of cataloging, what is the primary thing that we are supposed to do? Be objective. We are to be unbiased. Right? Now I do this because frankly, there's only one person I could imagine being unbiased, and that's God, right? Because we're human, it's impossible. Just to breathe means that we have an impact. Just the fact that we believe certain things like libraries can make a difference is a belief, it's a bias. Now, it's amazing to me the number of librarians who will disagree with the statement going, librarians are good for society, but by and large, we're going to agree that libraries are good for society. That's a choice, that's a decision. And as we explore that through the night, that comes from lots of different reasons. So why do we choose to make a difference? Why is it that we believe that this is important to do? I would argue the reason we choose to make a difference is because of our mission. Now, this is a mission that I concocted in this book. Now, how many of you read this book as part of a class? I would just like to take a moment to apologize to all of you who ride a bike or the subway. I get it, it's pointy and it's heavy, but it looks gorgeous on my coffee table. Right? The next one's going to look like this when you've already made me promise. Right? And Kim's going to make sure it happens. So this is something I came up with that book, but I would argue this is a mission that many people, in fact, we were just, before this started, looking at the 50th anniversary. Who is the person who put together the slideshow for the 50th anniversary here? Because you did a brilliant job. It was gorgeous and intimidating to see people for the past 50 years have said exactly what I'm going to say, and we still haven't gotten it. But anyway, right? The mission of librarians is to improve society through facilitating knowledge creation in their communities. Right? So this is a mission that I argue. And there's a couple of things I'd like to point out about this mission that I won't go too much into because you've probably heard it way too much. And I want to get to sort of the interesting bits. But the first part is that it's a two-part mission. Many people read it as a mission, but actually it's two parts. The first part is the mission of librarians is to improve society. You go, you're welcome to stop there, by the way. The second part is how we do it, which is through facilitating knowledge creation in our communities, because there are lots of people that you would argue are there to improve society. Most professions, one way or another, say they're there to improve society. Doctors, lawyers. Sorry, it's the US thing, right? Politicians. No, all right. This argument that we're there to make things better is a sort of common argument. But we don't do it anyway. We do it a specific way, which is through knowledge creation. It's what sets our profession apart. Now, there's two other parts that we'll get to in a moment. But for now, that sets us apart, that we're knowledge people. Right? And that means that if we're going to talk about how we improve society and why that's a choice, we need to spend a little bit of time on knowledge and knowledge creation. Because for me, this is one of the fundamental shifts that we're looking at as a profession, which is we have for so long believed that and imbued inanimate objects with superhuman abilities that it's almost amazing for the fact that we put them back in their place. I mean, this is a book. This is a paperweight. This is dead trees. This is not knowledge. I wrote it. It's not knowledge. Right? What's in your head? when you read it, when you think about it, when you agree with it, when you disagree with it, when you move, that's knowledge. But this is an artifact. It's an object. It's useful. It's a great tool. It's the scalpel to our surgery. But it's just an artifact. And at least if we're in the knowledge business, we get ourselves out of the information business. Anyone run across this one before? If you're in information school, probably at some point you've had to deal with this. Right? This is the idea that we're in the information business. I honestly don't know what information is. I'm going to admit that just freely. I have a PhD in it, still haven't gotten it, but that's good. There's an old joke that by the time you're done with your elementary education, that education's good for about 100 years. Things don't change. When you're done with your high school education, you get a good 50 years. By the time you're done with your bachelor's, that gets you maybe 10. Right? Master's, 2. And when you get your PhD, you're literally have made yourself obsolete by the time you walk the stage. So it's not unusual that I admit things that I don't know. But this is right. This is what we're supposed to be doing. Right? So this is the old data, information, knowledge, wisdom hierarchy. And it's really a pyramid because at the bottom is data, and that's simple measurements, ones and zeros, volume levels, all these sorts of things. And there's lots of it around, tons and tons and tons and tons. And then the next level up is when we add context to this data. When data begins to make sense, that becomes information. So the idea is when I say something like 20, that means nothing. If I say it's 20 out, it still means nothing. Because if I say it's 20 out, it means I'm wearing a coat. If you say it's 20 out, it means someone's moved to Toronto. Right? That context matters. And that's where we begin to move up to knowledge, which is to put context around it, how that measurement and that context connects in, and how we can use that together. And then wisdom is when we can use those patterns to our own devious purposes, like it's 20 out in Syracuse, it's time to sell gloves and clean up from all the undergraduates who went to Syracuse from Florida. There's an active market. It used mittens that day. Anyway, right? So this is what we're supposed to do, right? And we decided to pick the information layer because as librarians, we're information professionals, and information is what it's all about, right? Except it doesn't work. When you really break down, there was a great study, I think Zinn did it with 50 different information specialists, and they asked them what is information, and they got 50 different definitions back. I did this with my own faculty. I asked 5. I got 10 definitions back. My favorite was, I don't know, I don't care, right? Oh, Jason. All right. But this is the level we picked. And it's the level that we have succeeded beyond our wildest dreams at. Information retrieval, database design, websites, putting in data management, the idea that we can connect people all over the world. Email goes crazy, and now I could go into the 3-hour orgasm of statistics about how information's going beyond our wildest dreams. And, when I was a child, a megabyte looked that big, and now it's this big. Anyway, you get my point. But here's my problem. When we go, I know what data is. I can figure out data. It's a measurement. It's ones and zeros, or it's an analog measurement. It's some way we've captured it. I get it. But when we get to information, the real problem becomes what is information to me is not the same what information is to you. It's an anthropomorphic definition of something, which means it's ultimately a single definition, which means it's not very operational. It's an N of 1. And so while we've gone and struggled and figured through this, we keep running into the same problem over and over and over and over again, which is why isn't this solving our problem? We added more information to it. Right? The U.S. Congress, the U.S. government is the largest information producer on the face of the earth. Clearly, it solved all our problems. Right? So information processing, wisdom, let's face it, wisdom here is just a hope. It's just a prayer. Which I was at a Rogers store the other day, And I had a delightful conversation as we waited for the store to open with a woman who was deciding which one of these to get, right? And she's, the 6, is it too big, whatever. Her defining thought about this, because here, I'm a geek, and let's face it, I'm a man, so I'm going to, of course, help out. Don't throw things at me yet, I promise, it gets better. And this much memory, and it's got this child, and if you get the plus, it's got image stabilization. You gotta have image stabilization on your camera. Because God knows, when I take a picture of my damn dog, he's always moving, so you need image stabilization. And she looked at it and she goes, nope, won't fit. Next. And it was perfectly brilliant because she was right. That was a more important thing for her. Right? That was wise on her part. Information did not help me in that situation. But we've used this for so long. When information was born to us and we lived in an information age and computers were startling and changing the universe, it changed how we thought about the world. And so we created a concept we call information. And if you look at how it worked, we look now back. Where did we get that concept? So for example, you don't like this one? I don't like this one. This one doesn't win you prizes. This one does. This is Claude Shannon's information theory, right? This changed the world. This changed how telecommunications thought, how computing sciences worked. This changed how physics thought about information. And just to break it down really quickly, over here we have our sly sender. He's got a message. She's got a message. It's a smiley face. It's got a message. That message is transmitted over some sort of channel or medium. Invariably, there will be some noise in the channel. That will go to some sort of receiver, and then that gets put into our poor little helpless emoticon who receives the message. And, by the way, that was really startling. It took us another 30 years in information science to add this nice little line at the bottom, which is feedback, which is, can you hear me now? Does this make sense, right? And if that noise gets too noisy, we lose image signal, and this is mathematically operational. This is what Bell companies used to measure whether the quality of the line was sufficient, how they could minimize static, how they could overload it, and it's been used in just about everything, including education. Right? The problem with this idea of information as a thing, as Michael Buckland would talk about in one of his 3 definitions, is that it assumes that what we've got is a message and an empty bucket on the other hand. We used to talk about this in lectures. This is the empty bucket lecturing models. You are all but empty buckets. And I, as a professor, am throwing bricks of wisdom. Already, come on, bricks of wisdom, right? Right? And if for some reason you don't pick up what I'm saying, maybe your bucket was a little thin that day, right? Because it's not my fault. These are bricks of wisdom. So what we know about this simplistic model is that receiver over there is not an empty bucket. That receiver over there is not a piece of technology. That receiver over there is not a telephone. It's a person. And that person doesn't simply an empty bucket waiting for information to come in, right? They've got this whole world of information that they're going to relate it to. Right? So this message comes in. It's not simply a matter of going yes or no. Wait for it. All right. It's not just simple of yes or no. It's a matter of, do I believe it? Don't I believe it? Who's saying that? That's a piece of crap. Oh, I already heard that. Oh, you can't believe it. Oh, what language is that? Right? All of this happens because we are not receivers. We're people. And as people, when we share knowledge, when we share what we know or we learn new things, it goes against the whole network of what we already believe. What I would say we know, but then the philosophers of the audience will stand up and we will have a very long conversation about constructivism and postmodernism, and I will not do that yet. We'll get there, right? So when I say this is information, you run it against things like, well, in my experience, that's not information, or that's fine, Dave, because we do all this all the time, right? We have words that mean 3,000 things, and we just want to know through this, right? So my kids and I, to my wife's ever horror, are geeks from really deep. And so we went to go see Guardians of the Galaxy. Yes? Anyone? I am Groot. Right? Who would have thought that Vin Diesel's most expressive acting experience would come as an animated tree that said, I am Groot. And that was it. But you got it. I'm Groot. Yeah, Groot. Okay, Groot. Got it. Right? That's because this. We understand things in a different way. We interpret things in a different way. We're not empty receivers. What this represents, and what we're struggling with as we're working with the Radicals Guide, is this represents not just one way of thinking about knowledge, but it really represents an entire shift in how society contemplates the role of the institution to the role of the individual. Now, how's that for heavy? But if you think about it for a moment, this idea, a shift from information to knowledge, is a shift from external to internal. When we tend to talk about information, we tend to use it as a way of externalizing. Something is information, not something we have as information. We share information. We document information. We loan information. We do databases. Shannon transmits information. But now we're saying, wait, no. Information may be a message, it may be a signal, but it's not a one-to-one match with what we know. If I tell you something and you don't believe it, I can tell you this over and over again and you will still not believe it. This whole idea of knowledge and truth and such, good old-fashioned library reference, if I am at the reference desk and a librarian walks up to me and says, I would like information on climate change. And you say, let me get you the scientific consensus, which is climate change is man-made. And they go, no, don't give me that crap. Give me the right stuff. The way that you are going to satisfy that user's query, we'll get to user later, is not to say, no, really, it's a big consensus. There's lots of consensus. This is like heavy consensus, right? That's not going to matter. So if you start from, this is the truth, and I don't care where you are on the spectrum, you're not going to make any difference. You're not going to begin to open up that conversation. You're not going to begin a dialogue. You're not going to begin building knowledge. What you're going to do is you're going to set yourself with social odds, and no transmission is going to occur. Their bucket will close. But this is only one example of it. In teaching, we know we've moved from the idea that we teach to students learn. And we say that, the sage on the stage, pardon the irony of saying that in this setup, becomes the guide on the side. We know that good pedagogy is engagement, interactivity, in structured curriculum that doesn't simply test you on a sheet, but get you out building projects and trying them, etc. When you go to an ed school, when you talk to theorists in pedagogy, when you talk about good teaching, it isn't about how I can teach you. And if they're not learning, I just talk louder, which is the social equivalent of going and speaking to someone who speaks a foreign language, and to make yourself understood, you speak quite slower. Really? Oh, that helped, right? This idea that the learner's in charge. That no matter how good and fancy and wonderful and designing and good I am at dancing, if you don't want to listen, you're not going to listen. It will make no difference. Right? We see this in credibility, where we used to say, credibility comes from the channel. If it's on the TV news, we'll believe it. If it's on the newspaper, we'll believe it. It's on the internet, you can't trust it at all. That the source had some sort of vested credibility. This was a government statement. Remember when this is a government statement used to be a sign of quality and not a beginning of a fight? The latest report from ding, 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 ding. Yeah, let's hear this one. That's changed to, if you want me to believe it, show it to me. Let me see how it works. Show me the data. Right? It's all line, of course. People who want statistics usually don't care which ones you give them. But anyway, we have graphs. It'll be fine. That shift in how we think about credibility is only one example. In the humanities, we move from the sense that the author puts their ideas in print, we hand them to someone, and those ideas magically make their way to the reader's mind. Now, any good English major like to take a moment to just throw a rotten tomato, as I mentioned, things like postmodernism and the idea that really there's a critical theory. We interpret texts apply to us in our context and our situation, and how you interpret a book and how I interpret a book is not a product of the book. It's a product of you and I. We see this in system development, where it used to be that we built systems. And systems were hard and complex and expensive, and it took a lot of time, and we had to train people to think like a machine. We heard someone today at the alumni panel talking about the first time they heard binary was here. The first time anyone came to rue the name of Venn was here. Right? Monsieur Boule can go to hell. My favorite, by the way, and or nor, my favorite, Zor. Exclusive or. If you do not have a favorite Boolean operand, I recommend it. It's a good party starter. Well, we moved from the idea that we train people to do the machine to no. We have user studies and user experience, and now we build the system around the user. Now, Andy Dillon, who's the dean at University of Texas at Austin's high school, once got into a lot of trouble because he stood up before Syracuse, and we are user-based people. We feel somehow we own that concept. And said, user-based is a void idea and it's dead. And the worst part is, then I agreed with him. Because a lot of user studies are, okay, I'm building a system. What do you want? No. What do you want? No. What do you want? Yes! And you're a user. Done! Right? Pick your user. You can find someone who agrees with you. These freaks we'll just ignore. And if you don't believe me, all right, we're going to have an interactive portion of the evening. Someone have an Android phone. Does someone not believe in ease of use? All right. Someone with access to, come forward. Really, seriously, you got to get it. All right, so here we go. Someone with an iPhone. Someone who believes that Steve Jobs is God and he deserves our money for no good reason. Anyone? All right, Kim, you come up. All right. You're bringing a phone with you. Yes. No, I'm asking for no good reason. Now, unlock your phone. We're going to steal your data. It'll be fine. All right. Unlock your phone. Yeah. Okay. Hand her your phone. You hand him your phone. Okay, ready? I'm going to give you a phone number. You add it to a contact. Ready? It's 315-254-1389. Did you get it all? No, not call it. Don't call it. For God's sake, don't call it. She's going to do international calling with your phone. What's going on here? This is like a magic trick, isn't it? All right, stop. That's fine. Thank you very much. Blood first. Both of those systems have gone through user experience testing and user testing and looking at psychological studies and designers, and really rich white men in Silicon Valley decided this is how life should be. And it is. If I asked you to add that number to your phone, you'd be like, yeah, fine. Siri, I got a number for you, right? And you'd be saying, okay, Google. And don't you feel like a goof every time you say, okay, Google? Let's be honest. And how many people have had this? Sorry. What the hell, sorry? No, sorry. That's the user-based view. We've known now we move beyond that to social systems. If you look at Facebook, which is the most efficient corporate way to give out your identity information ever, right? What is Facebook? It is an account, a set of friends, and a wall. That's it. And what you do to it is by the friends you add, by the apps you add, if you decide that you'd like to farm things for a while, if you would like to take a survey to find out what Harry Potter character you are, right? You add that. But that means that by the time you're done, that feed, that wall, looks like you. You and the advertising they throw at you. But you, right? That's a different way of designing our systems. And so when we look at library catalogs, what do? What are you looking for? What are you looking for? We don't even do that. Let's face it, we're like, oh, does it do Boolean? Does it do XOR? Because I hear Linus likes XOR. So, that's got to be in the spec. Right? We don't even let people go in and say, I like the book. Can I add that little information? Or we do. But let's face it, adding social features to an online catalog is like staple gunning a satellite dish to a donkey. You can do it. Well, why? You thought it was going to be boring. Sure. All right. So we've also moved from universal reductionism to individual constructionism. We have moved past the day that Dewey saw the whole world and brought us but the 10 Commandments. Right? I mean, if there is anything better than saying that you can describe the entire world by a landowning white male from upstate New York who's a misogynist and anti-Semite, I think it's a great idea. If I could have gotten away with it, no. Anyway. Right? But we said that doesn't work. So we had the Library of Congress, so we can just add numbers at random. Right? But the idea is, have you ever been to the Library of Congress? It's great. It's wonderful. It's the only place I've ever been where you walk by the elevator and they have taped up signs going, "Today we'll be talking about H." It's like the Sesame Street of the library world, isn't it? This elevator brought to you by the number 300.15H. Hey, I know it's not a number, I threw an H in, it's not even hex. Okay, but we've moved from this idea that there's somehow some universal truth, some universal classification to the fact that we have communities adjusting, creating whole new ways of organizing materials. I talked to some librarians in Philadelphia, and the business librarians were just pissed off because they had to have cookbooks in the business area. Why? Because Dewey put cookery in business and industry. Why? Women's work. I'm not, no, that's what he did. Don't blame me. He's dead. Find him. Right? But the librarians, they were sitting there going, can we move them? Yes, you can move them. I mean, even if you're a dyed-in-the-wool cataloger, it's like, it's not like a shelving list. You can move the numbers wherever you want. Right? But we've also now need to continue this thing that we see in systems, in education, in sociology, in English, in textual studies, in anthropology, in physics, into our field. So we need to move from library to librarian. We need to own individual agency. The success of interactions with our institutions are dependent upon the choices of the individuals who work in the institutions. If you have ever looked and said, our website sucks, take a moment, breathe deep, because I got bad news for you. Your website sucks. Right? Whatever, they don't listen to me and they don't talk to me and I'm all alone. It doesn't matter. You're as culpable as, it's like, an accessory after the fact. You killed the website, you were there, you're responsible for murder. We move from consumer to participant. The idea that we are not preparing a world that simply sits back and absorbs content like buckets on a couch potato couch. Takes a moment, right? We've moved from the idea that these walled gardens, that this idea that we simply are creating a people who are good at paying for things and watching things and not having an opinion on things, this is not good for our world. This is not good for our society. And yet, all too often, we are accessories unto the fact. E-book publishing models are bad for communities, period, done, enough said. If we accept them, we are accepting something that is less than optimal for our community. Sorry, it's more optimal for the publisher. I'm not saying their publishers are evil, but we need to acknowledge that our community is making that decision as well. Were they involved? Did we discuss them? Did they understand more than, does my Kindle work? Did they understand that if their Kindle works and they buy a book through Kindle, Amazon can take it away? Do they understand that even though they love the book, if they get rid of their Kindle and they buy an iPad, they're out of luck? Well, I know, you've got the app, stick with me, right? That people are making walled garden decisions without knowing that even though those walls are beautiful and elegantly appointed, they are still tall, they are still high, and they still will prevent you from escaping an ecosystem that you did not build nor necessarily consciously add to. So what we have is a pull on librarianship. Now I want to be really honest. These are pulls on me. As I'm working on this next book, as we did the new librarianship, as people read the atlas, everyone came out of the corners to start going, well, what about this? And what this really meant was, and pull me in wherever they want to go. But these are the pulls that we have. And the first pull that we have is we have this strong pull to librarianship as craftsmanship. That when we look at library science education, when we look at continuing education, when we look at the professional literature, when we look at the discussions, when we look at the time spent, how much of the time do we spend as librarians talking about why, and how much do we spend about how? How do we catalog? How do we do reference? How do we do reader's advisory? How do we do this? That's craftsmanship. And there's nothing wrong with craftsmanship. But as a profession, you expect something slightly different than craftsmanship, right? Do you want me to teach you, we were just having this discussion today, do you want me to teach you skills, or do you want to learn competencies where skills help you implement them? And I know that sounds like a nice little semantic wedge, but I promise you, when the next thing comes, what do? Why is it that we look at we build policies for our physical locations that are all about how to be a good community citizen? Don't disrupt other people, don't throw things at people, don't threaten people, right? All of our ejection criteria are based on nice, please. And when we write our policies for our online sites, they're all about don't be a thief, don't steal from us, we're watching you. It's all about how the individual works in. There was a great researcher in the UK. They took teenagers and they sent them through online databases, like through Elsevier and such. And they asked them, what'd you think? And the major response that the teenagers gave them back was, it was quiet. Now, as an old system metadata geek, we go, yay, noise reduction. But that's not what they meant. What they meant was, my other friends, my other colleagues, my teachers, previous students who went through this couldn't mark and say, oh, this is a good article. Have you seen this one? Look at this one. Let's face it, the vast majority of people, well, let's put it out for me. The reason people buy the used book is as much for finding someone who has good notes in the good book as for the cheap version. And why is it that now students are going apoplectic, that they have to lease books and give them back at the end of the semester? It's not just because it's more expensive. Yes, it's more expensive. But it also means that they've got that social part of reading. It's quiet in there. So we have a field pulled by this. We have a field pulled in different silos. I always talk about this as my academic algebra. If you become an academic and you're on the tenure system, the calculus that you do, the algebra, it looks like this. Take pond, divide pond until biggest fish within I am. Sort of Yoda algebra, right? So it's like, I'm not an information scholar. I study libraries. There are too many people. All right, I study reference. Too many people are doing that. I study virtual reference. I study people who do reference via Commodore 64 on Tuesday, and I am the leader in my field. Right? So there's an old joke I used to do that IT people, that technology people never say no. What they do is throw 3 little acronyms at you until you leave. I'm convinced that librarians have an equivalent. Librarians never tell you no. They simply tell you what a brilliant idea your idea is for another type of library. Right? Oh, that's a great idea. And if we were a public library, we would consider that. Oh, that was great, but we're too big. We're an urban library. We're special. Oh, we're a small library. We're special. We can't do that. Right? So everyone's special in their own way. It's okay. Right? We're pulled by our domains. Are we a humanity? Are we a social science? Right? Are we in philosophy? Are we in talking to physicists? Are we talking to sociologists? We're pulled in our philosophies. Do we encounter truth? Let's face it. What's the line from Star Wars? Never before have you seen such a hive of villainy when they're talking about Mos Eisley Space Station. I told you I was a geek. Right? Never have you seen a more despicable hive of lies and untruths than a good academic library, right? You've got to have the crap to measure the good stuff. You've got to have the different stuff put together. You've got to have a history. You've got to have all that thought to pull together. So, do we collect the truth? Or do we collect the best that we can at the time? And then we can talk about in critical theory. Increasingly, I'm being dragged into critical theory, frankly, kicking and screaming, but at the same time going, yeah, power exists. Okay, right? So how do we deal with this? I'm convinced, and I think I'm actually past time. Am I not? Where am I supposed to go to? All right, well, I'll be done soon. Why did we choose the title Radical Librarians? Because I believe we need a radical shift in librarianship to ensure the success of our communities and the continuation of our profession. And I choose radical because, let's face it, it's really, before I came to a place having a strike in front of it, was a really fun metaphor to have. I did this down in New York with school librarians, and it was great. Everyone thought it was like fun, radical. They was like, oh man, when I was in the 60s, radical, it's great to see it coming back. And radical's interesting. What's great about the term radical, which comes back to English, because English is just a stupid language. Anyone see Eddie Izzard do Latin? If you YouTube, there's some F words, I'm going to warn you, but it's just my entire high school experience with Latin in a hilarious episode. Radical has multiple meanings. So the first meaning that people rarely use is the idea of fundamental. In biology, a radical is the part that you can transplant to make something grow again. The joke I used, and I apologize for those who are at Toronto Public Library, but I'm going to use again. If your surgeon does a radical appendectomy, it does not mean that they're like a leftist who are going to steal your appendix and distribute it to the masses. That's not what radical means. It means they take the whole thing. Radical can also mean extreme, as in extreme political positions, but extreme in that it really does push the edge. But lastly, thanks to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, it means wicked cool. And what I love about radical and the idea of radical librarianship is that librarianship is all three of those senses. And so when I say that we need a radical change, what I mean is complete and extreme, but based on our fundamental values, and it's going to be really cool. That's the kind of change we're talking about. So when we look at the poles of librarianship, yes, these are all poles, but we've got to stake some claims. So for reasons of staking claims, we've got to get rid of craftsmanship, and we've got to replace it with the idea of reflective practice. That we do know how, and we spend time on how, but we spend a lot of time on why. Because I talk about the community as your collection, and people often say, well, if I let the community come, who says they're an expert? I say, good news. We have this concept, it's called collection development, but rather than it being, which book are we missing, it's, is this person stupid or not? Is this person I'm willing to share with the public? Is this person that need to be shut away behind a door? Whatever it is. This idea of collection development, of metadata, of organizational schema, of community places, of preparing locations, of our ethics and our values are still there. They're the why that drive the how. But the why has to be fundamental in how we prepare librarians. And to get rid of the silos, we need to talk about librarians, not libraries. Because here's the trick. There are 99 branches of the Toronto Public Library, if I heard correctly. Are there 100? There are 100 now? I missed one. Well, it's close. Now, there's 100. Guess what? There should be 100 different feels to that, 100 different looks to that, which I know, as the director, is a terrifying idea. But the idea is it needs to look like the communities that they're in. In Dallas Public Library, they had a master plan that said everyone looks like this. You realize it's the same scheme that McDonald's uses. Everyone looks like this. Is this really libraries? We're the McDonald's of the information world, right? That's not what we're going for. It should be different by the communities that we serve, by the individuals we're in. And instead of talking about what domain we're in, we need to acknowledge that we're cross-disciplinary. That one of the reasons we have such a hard time writing job announcements for iSchools is because we don't have a domain to pick from. We have too many to pick from. And we might have core knowledge, but we need to span them. We need to bring back the idea of someone who can span multiple topics and have an interesting dinner conversation. And instead of worried about truth, we need to adopt pragmatic constructivism. which is just a hilarious way of saying we need to acknowledge that people's beliefs are going to matter when we seek to be educational, when we seek to engage them in learning. When we seek to improve society, we must acknowledge that not everyone starts from the same belief structure, not everyone starts from the same point, and you cannot simply draw a line in the sand and say, this is, as a librarian, what we know to be true. Screw you if you don't believe it. We have to acknowledge that there are people who disagree with us, and then dedicate ourselves to fixing them. But the idea is that we at least start by acknowledging their multiple points of view. And instead of worrying about critical theory, we need to think about librarians as powerful empowerers of the multitudes. Multitudes is an interesting, this was Meg Bacchus, brilliant librarian, came up with this, and she goes, the innovation thing doesn't work really well. There are a lot of libraries that talk about starting entrepreneurs, and they have sessions, and then they say, well, did you start any businesses? And their answers are sort of like, is that our business to know? Yeah, it's called an impact. It's called an outcome. And she said, well, the problem is, by the way, so I don't seem completely cantankerous. and of course, I should hit another one for the LED bulb, but we'll go with it, right? The thing with entrepreneurship is in entrepreneurship, it's all about having to acquire capital, and capital involves risk. If you have to get money, you have to take risk. If you lose the money, Guido's going to find it, whatever it is. My wife's Italian. I know who's coming, right? But libraries can do this radically differently, which is instead of thinking about entrepreneurs, think about building networks. When people have great ideas, often what they need is not capital. They need access to expertise. They need access to a network of people. They need access to the multitudes. And then, I got a great idea. I got a programmer. I got a designer. I got a good friend who can do water wheels. I don't know. We bring them together and magic can occur. And we're here, let's face it, as libraries, we're not very good at the economic side and venture capital. Here, we got networks. That's consortia. That's us. We can run marketplaces of ideas where people come in and share ideas and share inventions and share dreams and aspirations. And that's the world we can be in. So who chooses what improves society is? It is not as simple as saying, well, the community decides. I've heard that a lot in these last 2 days. Community-led innovation, community-led librarianship, communities. I hate to break it to you, there are some idiots in the communities. Right? Mostly me, but others like me. We don't want to let me choose. It's not a good idea. But we know these communities have needs. These communities, what's more important, have aspirations, and they have dreams. And that's where you find the really interesting stuff. But we also know they have conflicts. They are communities that are pitted against each other. There are communities that disagree. There are communities that will never agree. And there still are communities. So who chooses? Who picks? Is it the librarians? Well, the librarians, we're not exactly silent on this topic. We come to the table with beliefs. We call them our principles. We believe in the power of learning. We believe that learning is a lifelong endeavor that doesn't stop or start with the school door. We believe that we must learn all the time in new ways and new things. We believe that we learn from fiction. We believe we learn from narratives. We believe we learn from the past. We believe we learn from the future. We believe that we learn in all things. We believe in openness, that the best learning occurs in the open access to new ideas and new thoughts. We believe in intellectual freedom and intellectual safety. That is, that a library is a safe place to engage dangerous ideas. We believe that you should be able to research any topic and not be branded a terrorist, a fascist, or whatever it is, simply by the materials that you read, because we know that the way you equip yourself to deal with evil, the way you equip yourself to deal with ignorance, the way you equip yourself to deal in discussions and conflict is you first educate yourself on that topic. And you should have the freedom to do it without people looking over your shoulder and wondering what you're doing. We believe not that we are unbiased, objective, or somehow superhuman. That the fact that we must acknowledge that our skin color, our gender, our race, our locality, our accent, our size, our stature, all affect interactions, even subliminally. We must understand that simply by standing before a desk in public and having people do the most unnatural human act, to admit ignorance in public, we believe that that's a good thing. And that we understand that while we cannot be unbiased, we will endeavor in all ways to be intellectually honest, to acknowledge that there are multiple viewpoints and to provide access to them when desired. We acknowledge that we may not agree with people, but we agree with their right to research and speak and provide that information. That is a bias, but it's a good one. It's intellectually honest. This is, by the way, the tenet of science. No scientist ever says they are in the world of truth. They are in the world of truth so far. A theory is not the truth. A theory is a belief that has yet to be disputed, which is why, by the way, the popular press pummels us on such a regular basis and says, oh, that's just a theory. And if you're in Kansas, that means we don't teach it, even though it's frickin' evolution. Come on. Anyway, I take a moment. I digress. So who chooses this? Who makes this decision? Who defines what improved society means? Is it the librarian or the community? And of course, the answer is the community. Because we are part of the community. We are a voice within the community. We are an employee of the community. We are a sponsor of the community. We are an educator of the community. We're a member of the community. We live, we talk, we work on a regular basis. To improve the community's condition is to improve our condition. To be selfish in hoping that this is a good place to live means that we can live in a good place. It's okay. And it means that you have a voice, that you have a position, that you have a view, that you can share, that you can be an advocate, that you can fight, that you're allowed to say, I am a librarian, and by being a librarian, I do have a point of view. And I will fight for your right to be a better community, and I will fight for your right to speak, and I will fight for your right to be informed and knowledgeable. And I believe in your power to change and govern yourself, and that is fundamental to my being. And we will only go so far before I will refuse to bend to those rights and those beliefs. We cannot believe that we are objective. We cannot believe that somehow we are a profession that makes no difference. If you believe in empowerment, if you believe that the world is better because of communities, if you believe that the world is better because of libraries, that's a belief. And it's a radical belief. And it's one that you hold, and you as a professional, not as a building, not as an institution, and not because Dave said so, but that you as a professional will make this happen, that you are on a mission, and that you too believe that change in our communities can be fundamental, extreme, and a lot of fun. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.